What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Magicka Dragonknight DPS. So the Magicka is one of those very strange DPS classes where while you are using Magicka as your primary resource and you're using spell damage as your primary damage resource, you're not really considered, or at the very least you're not competing with Magicka DPS spots, mainly because most other Magicka DPS are what we like to call range DPS. They basically are able to stand at range. Magicka, on the other hand, a lot of your abilities require you to be within 8 to 10 meters of the boss, essentially putting you more or less within melee range. So Magicka, while you do use Magicka as your primary damaging resource, you're actually competing more with stamina DPS because stamina DPS take up those melee spots there. So in terms of comparing DPS, you can certainly compare it to a Magicka DPS, other classes. However, it might be more accurate to compare it to a stamina DPS, and when you do that, Magicka do end up falling a little bit short here. They do have quite a few perks going for them, one of them being that you're able to make very good use of the new set Zaan's Redress for 5% additional damage taken debuff on the enemy. But beyond that, Magicka are kind of in this weird spot here where they're stronger, very strong compared to other Magicka DPS classes, but when compared to stamina DPS classes, they're not quite as strong as many of them. So just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build yourself. We'll talk a little bit behind some various sets that you could wear in place of this particular build. And then we'll close things off with a 21 million dummy parse so you guys can get an idea of the rotation itself. And we will also be discussing two other parses, so I should say we will be looking at two other parses from other gear combinations so you guys can get an idea of what happens when you swap out certain set pieces. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with our gear. So again, this is just one of many different potential setups here, but I have found this to be one of the strongest setups here. Let me just double check here. Okay, so the first set, as you can see here, is going to be Perfected Siroria, and this is going to be a front bar set here. So this comes from Cloud Rest. You can get the Joy from +2 and up, or if you're lucky enough to be on the leaderboards for the week, you can also get them from leaderboards. Then you have Sororia's Perfected Inferno Staff, which drops from any vet Cloud Rest sort of configuration, so +0, 1, or 2. You could also run Jewelry if you would like. It's kind of up to you. The not Jewelry, Armor if you'd like. The Armor does drop from vet Cloud Rest +1, so a little bit easier to obtain than the Jewelry themselves. For our body set, we're going with Mother's Sorrow. You don't necessarily need to use all armor. You can also swap this out with Siroria for jewelry as well. But Siroria Golden Jewelry is arguably a little bit easier to obtain because Mother's Sorrow is an overland set, so you will only be able to get purple jewelry unless you decide to upgrade it or you get lucky with the Golden Vendor on the weekends and they happen to sell Mother's Sorrow. You definitely want to have Mother's Sorrow on either your body and jewelry. You definitely want to have it active on both bars if you can. It might not necessarily be possible depending on your second set, but you do want to keep that spell crit bonus going because the Shadow Mundus is still a very powerful Mundus, so you want to combine that with the high crit chance that Mother's Sorrow provides for you. For your Marshalled Helm set, we're still going with Zaan. Zaan is still the strongest Marshalled Helm set in the game. The new Marshalled Helm sets from Scalebreaker do not change this at all. So you definitely want to wear it if you can. You will almost always be within that 8 meter radius, so you will be able to make the most use of Zaan as a Magicka. Do note that I do have a max health enchant here, and this is because Magicka's sustain is still pretty poor, so you're not able to really use blue food at all. I am using Clockwork Citrus Fillet as your primary food, which does give you additional sustain, but it also ends up giving you lower health than running just pure blue Bystat food. So in that instance, it is going to be, you will need that additional max health enchant there to get your health up to an acceptable level for raids. In terms of traits and enchants here, we have all divines on our armor pieces. We are still going 5 on 1, so that's 5 light, 1 heavy, 1 medium. All Max Magicka enchants, except for 1 large piece, where you will have that 1 max health enchant. And for our jewelry, all 3 Bloodthirsty with all 3 spell damage enchants here. For your front bar, you can go Precise or Infused with a flame damage enchant. The higher your DPS is, the stronger Precise becomes. So if you're lower DPS, around under 55 to 60k, I would probably say stick with Infused. If you're able to hit 55 or 60k or higher, then Precise will start ending up being stronger than Infused. And for our back bar, a Maelstrom's Inferno Staff infused with an Absorbed Magicka enchant. Even with the Clockwork Surge's Fillet additional regen, it's still quite challenging to fully sustain a light attack rotation by running a weapon damage glyph, so we are going to be trying to pad up our regen a little bit with an Absorbed Magicka enchant. In terms of other sets to wear, there are two other sets. I've already mentioned one of them. The first one is going to be Zen's Redress. This is a new set that comes from Lair of Marslok. It's a light armor set that comes from there. The 2-piece gives you Magicka regen. It also gives spell damage and Max Magicka. And the 5-piece, your light attacks apply the Touch of Zen on enemies for 20 seconds. Enemies with this debuff take 1% more damage for each damage over time effect you've placed on them, up to a total of 5%. So maximum of 5% additional damage taken. You only receive the benefit from one Touch of Zen per enemy. So if multiple people are wearing Zen's Redress, you only get the effect of one of them. So the damage over time effects do count single target dots only. So things like Blockade and Eruption do not count towards this 5%. Things like Engulfing Flames and Burning Embers do count. So on a Magicka, it's actually fairly easy to maintain that full 5% additional damage done, making this a very powerful set in the hands of Magicka. The other set is going to be Elemental Succession. This comes from the Maelstrom Arena. You can get any of these pieces running it on normal or vet, so it's kind of up to you where you want to run this. It adds Max Magicka, spell damage, and Max Magicka. And the 5-piece, when you deal Flame Shock or Frost damage, you gain 550 spell damage for that element for 4 seconds, and this effect can occur every 4 seconds per element. It is 4 on the live server. We're still on the previous version of the PTS, so that's still bugged onto 5 seconds. You can have multiple different elemental buffs active simultaneously. Now, one thing to take note of here is the 550 spell damage is not for all elements, it is just for that single element, Flame, Shock, or Frost damage. This means that magic damage, Soul Trap, and Degeneration do not benefit from this spell damage. That being said, a lot of your damage is going to be flame damage as a Magicka, and so you do get very good uptime on Elemental Succession. Here on the PTS, you will only be able to get 80%, but on live, you should be able to get 100% fairly easily on a Magicka for a total of 550 spell damage for about 80% of your damage. Soul Trap and Degeneration, typically speaking, will be covering about 16 to 20% of your overall damage. So even though you are only getting 80%, it's still an effective 450 additional spell damage. So that's still a pretty strong buff here. The downside is you will not be getting any sort of minor Slayer bonus, so if you are replacing Siroria with this set, you will be losing minor Slayer. But the benefit is that you still gain pretty much the exact same armor bonuses otherwise, so 2 Max Magicka and 1 spell damage. The max spell damage you get from Inferno, I should say Elemental Succession, is not going to be quite as strong, 450 compared to Siroria 600 at max stacks. But it is easier to maintain that 440 from Elemental Succession compared to Siroria, especially on more mobile fights. So there is a little bit of a trade-off there. If you're losing minor Slayer, you get lower average spell damage, but it is far easier to maintain compared to Siroria, especially on mobile fights. Zen's Redress does help address the Magicka regen issue. If you are using Zen's Redress, you can actually use buy-stat food. You can just barely sustain a 21 million dummy parse. So you might be able to run blue stat food, but Zen's is more of a support set, so not quite as strong, and personal DPS will go down, and you'll be able to see just how much towards the end of this video. Other sets that you might want to consider running here, starting off with other dungeon sets here. So in terms of dungeon sets, not many other sets that are particularly strong here, Burning Spellweave being a highlight here. This comes from City of Ash. So whenever you deal damage with a flame damage ability, you have a chance to apply the Burning Status effect and increase your spell damage by 525 for 8 seconds every 12 seconds. This gives you a lower average spell damage bonus compared to Elemental Succession, but you do swap out one of the Max Magicka enchants for a spell damage armor bonus, which is stronger than Max Magicka. So you do kind of make a little bit of a trade off there. So pretty strong. You will have to farm it from City of Ash, however. Moving on from there, that's pretty much the only other set that I would talk about outside of Zen's Redress, obviously. Moving on to overland sets. Not many other overland sets here to talk about. In fact, I can't really think of any that are particularly useful outside of Spinner's Garments, which is going to be pretty strong for trash fights. Just helps give you a little additional penetration for all the trash mobs that you have to hit, because you can't necessarily assume that Major Breach will be active on all the enemies, or Alkosh or Crusher. So having the additional penetration from Spinner's Garment is always nice to have. But in terms of just raw single target boss DPS, Spinner's Garment is definitely not a solid set, so I would probably swap that out for boss fights. Beyond that, there is one set called Soaks of the Sun from Stonefalls. This adds 400 spell damage to your flame damage abilities. It's a flat bonus, so ideally you would want to have this as a body set here. It's not going to be quite as strong as other sets, mainly due to the fact that even though it adds 400 spell damage to your flame damage abilities, you are running things like Soul Trap Degeneration, which lowers the effective spell damage that you are actually getting. Plus, it has a max health enchant on one of your armor bonuses, so in terms of raw DPS potential, it is not going to be as strong as some other sets. Finally, we have trial sets, of which there are pretty much very few trial sets that I would recommend. The only one being False God's Devotion, as well as Siroria. So False God's Devotion comes from Sunspire. It has a lot of armor bonuses, so 4 total armor bonuses along with Minor Slayer, and reduces the cost of your magic abilities by 8%. If you use False God's Devotion, you should be able to sustain a light attack rotation if you use and absorb Magicka enchant on your back bar here. Ideally, you're going to want to wear this on the body to maintain that magical cost reduction, but you can wear this as a front bar set if you'd like. It's just not going to be as effective if you wear it as a front bar set. Those are all of the potential armor bonuses, armor pieces that you can wear here. Moving on to our character sheet, I am a Dark Elf. Dark Elves are going to be one of the better races for Magicka DPS. The mathematically strongest is going to be the High Elves, the Ultimate. The Ultimate get 2000 Max Magicka and 258 additional spell damage. Dark Elves, on the other hand, get 1875 Max Magicka and 258 spell damage, so they get a little bit less Max Magicka. Dark Elves, on the other, do happen to get 1875 max stamina and 258 additional weapon damage as well, so if you want to kind of flip-flop between a Magicka DPS and a stamina DPS, Dark Elves kind of fit that role very, very nicely there. In terms of other potential races, one race you could potentially run is the Bretons. They get 2000 max Magicka. They do not get any sort of spell damage bonus. They get 100 additional Magicka regen, plus they get 7% cost reduction to all Magicka abilities. So as a Breton Magicka DK, you should be able to fully sustain a light attack rotation with blue food. It might be a little bit difficult to do so, but you should be able to do it with a Breton. Finally, if you kind of want to take a dip into all different potential roles, kind of want to make a jack of all trades character, Khajiits are a fairly decent race to choose, because they get max resources for Magicka health and stamina, not too much, 825. They get 85 Magicka and stamina regen, 100 health regen, and they get 10% additional critical healing done and critical damage done. So again, they do not have spell damage very similarly to the Bretons, but they make up for that a little bit with 10% additional crit damage. They also lose quite a bit of max resources, so only 825 max Magicka, but they do get a little bit of bonus to their sustain with 85 Magicka regen. They also get a little bit of health as well, so a little bit more survivability here. So you don't necessarily need to run that max health enchant, but you can still run Clockwork Citrus Fillet. You will not be able to sustain a full light attack rotation as a Khajiit, because obviously the Bretons get a little bit more Magicka regen plus the cost reduction, but it does make it a little bit easier for shorter fights to maintain it with blue food, so you're kind of making a little bit of that trade-off there. All our points are going into Max Magicka here, so instead of running that one health enchant on a large piece, you could instead shift some points over to health. Kind of up to you which one you want to make. The general rule of thumb is going to be to try to get to about 17k max health if you can, 16.5 to 17k, before you have Ebon and Toughness. So you can see here I'm sitting at 16.6k, so that's just barely enough where I would be considered comfortable for Vet Trials content. But if you want to bump it up a little bit higher, you can always add more health enchants, or you can shift some points into health. In terms of our Mundus Stone, we're still going with the Shadow here. This is still the strongest Mundus in the game. Nothing has changed with Munduses across this new patch. We are running Clockwork Citrus Fillet for our Magicka regen. For our Parse, I will be making some Ghastly Eyeball, so give us a more accurate comparison across the other Magicka DPS videos that I have. And then I highly recommend being a Vampire as a Magicka DK, just for the 10% additional regen that you get from Stage 2 Vampirism. Yes, you will end up taking more fire damage, but if it becomes an issue, then you can just reduce your Vampirism down to Stage 1, so you end up taking no extra damage from fire. You will end up losing the regen, but In some instances, especially in trials where you're not taking any fire damage, the stage 2 Vampirism really does help out a bunch with your sustain. So definitely recommend picking up Vampirism, but it's not absolutely necessary here. Next, going over our skill bars. For our front bar, we have Flame Lash. Flame Lash is a little bit stronger now, at least I like it, because the changes to off balance basically gives it a 7-second uptime. And so 7 seconds over 20 seconds, so it increases the uptime by a decent amount here. So Flame Lash is a pretty nice move to use here. You can use the other morph if you would like, which is Molten Whip. It's not going to be quite as strong just because you don't get the additional bonus from the proc there. You do happen to get a little bit stronger because you do get a little bit of additional spell damage when you use Engulfing Flames and Burning Embers, but because it is spammable, you will not be maintaining that spell damage bonus for very long. You could also use Elemental Weapon or Force Pulse too, so you have quite a few options for spammables. Next we have Degeneration, Burning Embers, Engulfing Flames, Scalding Rune, Shooting Star. For our back bar we have Flames of Oblivion, Eruption, Unstable Wall of Fire, Soul Trap, you should get Consuming Soul Trap, Barbed Trap. You can also replace this with Channel Acceleration if you'd like, if you have access to the Strategic Order line, so you would need access to Somerset to get Channel Acceleration here. Or you could also go with the other morph, which is Light Waste Beast Trap. So they increase the duration of Light Waste Beast Trap from 6 seconds to 10 seconds, so it does make sense to use Light Waste Beast Trap. Just keep in mind that the radius of the trap is pretty small at 2.5 meters, so you will have to take very careful aim with Light Waste Beast Trap in order to maintain your minor force. Then our ultimate's going to be Standard of Might. Next, going over our champion points, CP cap is still 810, which gives us 270 points to put across each of our 3 different constellation colors here. Starting off with our green CPs, we have 100 into Arcanist. That's pretty much the only requirement that I have. Then you can kind of shift the rest of your points wherever you'd like. So I have, for example, 75 in Tenacity, 31 Shadow Ward, 31 Tumbling, and 33 Warlord, which you can kind of split it up however you prefer. For blue CPs, this is assuming that you have all the debuffs active. So that would be things like Infused, Torx Crusher, Alkosh, Major Breach, Minor Breach, the whole kit there. If you are missing any of these debuffs, for example, you don't have Power of Light for the Minor Breach, or you're expecting low uptimes because perhaps you're running through progression, or then you will need to shift some points out of these nodes into Spell Erosion. So just make sure you're hitting those jump points, so that is the least amount of points that you need to kind of hit the next number here. So for example, the jump point for Elfborn would be 56, because that will bring you up to 20. But 57 would be a waste of a point there, so you want to do 56 or 61, because 61 will bring you up to 21. Or you can drop it down to 52, so that way you hit the 19. The 19 flat here is not actually 19, so you will have to bring it up to 52 here. So we have 61 Elfborn, 56 Elemental Expert, 11 into Spell Erosion, 11 into Staff Expert, 56 into Master at Arms, and 75 into Thaumaturge. Because of the boost to off-balance uptime, the increase to 75 for Thaumaturge for the Exploiter passive does end up beating out a more balanced sort of distribution. Not to mention, a lot of the damage from mag decays are dots. Finally, our red CPs. This is taking a very balanced approach to overall damage mitigation. So I have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thickskin, and 64 into both Hardy and Elemental Defender here. So that is pretty much it for all the build information. The last thing I want to talk about here would be any replacements for Monster Helm sets if you don't have access to Zaan, which does come from a DLC dungeon, Scalecolor Peak. Other Monster Helm sets that you could run instead. Grothdarr, if you have the base game, is going to be your strongest Monster Helm set for mag decays. It still has an 8 meter radius, but because you're mag decay, you have to stay within 8 meters anyways to get some of your dots off. So pretty nice. It also has some AoE potential behind it, so overall really nice set here. Do want to point out Iceheart here. This is one of the few Monster Helm sets that has 1-piece spell crit. And when you do critical damage, you have a 20% chance to gain a damage shield that absorbs 8600 damage. You also do a little bit of frost damage as well, which is pretty minor. The main reason why you'd be using Iceheart would be for the damage shield. So really, really strong for progression style stuff. 8600 damage shield is not something to laugh at, but it's not going to really break any sort of DPS records if you run Iceheart. From there, the only Monster Helm set that I would probably kind of keep in mind here would be, I think I passed over it, yes I did, would be Slimecraw here. So this is very similar to Iceheart, one of the few Maelstrom sets that give you additional spell crit as the 1-piece. The 2-piece gives you Minor Berserk at all times. Now, why Minor Berserk at all times? Well, sometimes your combat player uptime from your healer might not necessarily be very good. For example, you might be running Asylum hard mode, in which case it's difficult to get 100% combat player uptime, or you might be progressing through content and your healer is focused on other things. So in that instance, Slime Craw becomes pretty strong because Minor Berserk is a fairly powerful buff overall. So in instances where you cannot rely on your healer to give you the Minor Berserk, Slime Craw is a pretty decent option here. You could also go with 2 different Maelstrom sets, both with spell crit bonuses. So that would be Zaan, Slime Craw, or Iceheart. You can wear one of each of these. That'll give you 2 1-piece spell crit bonuses, which ends up actually being quite strong overall. So with all that said and done, that's all the build stuff, so let's go ahead and talk about the rotation. The rotation itself is going to be fairly dynamic, and you have a lot of dots to maintain. You can basically have 9 dots plus your spamble to maintain here, and these dots do not line up very well. Starting off with our front bar, Degeneration lasts for 12 seconds, Burning Embers 12, Engulfing Flames 12, so all of these 3 last for 12 seconds, which is pretty nice, but then things start to take an interesting change here. Scalding Rune lasts for 14 seconds. Flames of Oblivion lasts for 15 seconds. Eruption lasts for 18 seconds. Blockade, or I should say Unstable Wall of Elements, lasts for 8 seconds. Soul Trap lasts for 10 seconds. And Rearming Trap lasts for 18 seconds. So you can see here a lot of variation with our dot uptimes. So you're going to basically be playing a dynamic rotation. There's no really set rotation here. It's basically trying to maintain all your dots as you're doing your rotation here. So 2 things to keep in mind here is first, both Rearming Trap, or I should say Barbed Trap, and Scalding Rune have a arm time. So Scalding Rune here takes 2 seconds to arm. So you will want to recast this when there's 2 seconds left on the dots. That way you're able to take advantage of the 2 seconds. A Rearming Trap, kind of the same deal, has 1.5 seconds to arm, so you want to cast that about 1.5 seconds before it disappears here. Beyond that, the other thing to keep in mind is your dot priority. Out of all these dots, the ones that you want to prioritize are going to be Endless Wall of Elements for the Maelstrom buff uptime, Barbed Trap for the minor force, and Engulfing Flames for the 10% additional flame damage debuff you place on the enemy. From there, the next 2 dots are going to be Degeneration and Soul Trap. Those are probably going to be your next strongest dots here. Followed by, you want to try to maintain Eruption, as well as Scalding Rune, Burning Embers. I should say Burning Embers is probably going to be the top out of those 3, followed by Scalding Rune, and then Eruption, and Flames of Oblivion. You try to get it back up as soon as the 15 seconds fall off. So your rotation, again, is going to be dynamic here. When you're not re-upping in the dots, you would just be using Flame Lash. So every single rotation is going to be a little bit different here. So with that in mind, just make sure to remember all that as you do your rotation. The general idea again is to, as soon as your dot runs out, you recast that dot. That will require you to make many bar swaps here and there. Because of the many bar swaps that you're taking, you should have fairly good uptime on your front bar set. That is obviously where your spammable is, and you will be using a spammable whenever you're not casting a dot here. So, with all that said and done, first I'm going to go ahead and make Ghastly Eyeball here, so that way you can compare your sets, I should say your Parses, equally across the various classes. And we will be doing a 21 million dummy parse, so you guys can get an idea of exactly how much damage you can anticipate you running as Magicka. We'll also be comparing 2 other sets, and we'll talk about those when you go ahead and see the parses here. So again, Magicka's kind of filled this weird spot where they use Magicka as your primary damage resource, but you also compete with stamina DPS for melee spots. So I would say a more accurate comparison would be to try to look at stamina DPS spots rather than magic DPS spots, because you are eating up that melee spot. But you can also compare it to magic DPS specs as well if you're trying to look for the strongest Magicka DPS spec. So let's go ahead and get started here. You can see here in the ping, I do have some fluctuating ping here, so this parse might be on the lower end compared to what you might be seeing from other content creators like Lyco and so on. hopefully it won't affect my parts too much. I also do recommend trying to animation cancel out of the standard animation if you can. It's a very long animation. Important to make sure you have Flames of Oblivion run completely out, that way you do get that final fireball to go off. If you're on a boss that's going to be moving around a lot, you could potentially run Meteor instead as your ultimate. So here we're just going to put all of our dots down. So one thing I also recommend is if you think Engulfing Flames will run out before you can put down all your backbar dots, I do recommend just taking the time, let some of your backbar dots run off, so that way you can re-up Engulfing Flames. The additional 10% damage is actually quite strong. You're definitely a bit of a dynamic rotation here, as we are not really repeating anything, any sort of set pattern here. Again, we try to animation cancel out of the standard cast. Now we don't have to go through the whole animation there. And then we don't have a defined class execute, so our execute rotation doesn't change at all. You're just still washing all your dots here. So there we go. That is your Magicka parse here, and we bring out the parse for an 87.3k. So again, very strong compared to some other magic DPS classes. Not quite as strong as Magic Necromancers or Magicka Wardens, but still strong nonetheless. And again, you'd want to compare this closer to Stamina DPS for a more accurate comparison, because you will be eating up that melee spot there. So this is again with Siroria here, and you can see here when we were talking about Elemental Succession, while a lot of the damage is fire damage, Soul Trap and Degeneration, both in this particular parse at the very least, did about 13% damage, combined with the Absorb Magicka for just under, just under 70%, 17% additional damage. So you'd be really getting about 83% of that 550 additional spell damage. So again, just a little bit over 440 spell damage on average. So still a pretty strong set for Elemental Succession here. Speaking of elemental succession, this is with Siroria. You have two other parses here that I saved. This parse here is actually with Zen's debuff going out. This is with Zen's Redress and Mother's Sorrow. So if we go over to our info sheet here, we have, oh no, sorry, this is with Elemental Succession and Siroria, so we're wearing Elemental Succession instead of Mother's Sorrow here. We still have Perfected Siroria as our front bar set here. Basically, you're just replacing Mother's Sorrow. We pulled 83k here. And you can see if we go over to our buff uptimes that we have about a, where is it? 80% uptime on Flame Succession. Again, on live this should actually be 100%. They just bugged out on this last iteration of the PTS, which we're currently on. This is another potential option here. So this is with Zen's and Mother's Sorrow. So you're wearing Zen on the front bar here. In terms of debuffs here, Zen, Touch of Zen, you can see here is pretty much 100% uptime. It lasts for 20 seconds, so you can wear this as a front bar set here without losing it. And you can see here that we pulled about 82k instead. So if you want to wear Zens, you would be taking about a 5k to 6k DPS drop. But however, that damage decrease is more than made up in the increase that your friends get, because it would be a debuff on the enemy. So in terms of trade-offs here, this is a very worthy trade-off here for that additional 5% damage taken debuff on the enemy here. And you do have 100% uptime and Touch of Zen here. Now it is going to be tricky because this is just for the debuff, not for how much damage is incoming. But the uptime on our debuffs here is actually quite strong. So if we go ahead and go back here, take a look at debuff uptimes. Burning Embers is almost always up. Engulfing Flames is almost always up. Barbed Trap, Soul Trap, Degeneration, Scalding Rune. Burning also counts as well, so you have a lot of single target dots here, which would end up proccing this Touch of Zen. So 4 to 5% is actually very easy to maintain as a mag DK. But that is it for this build video. If you guys have any questions or comments about the build itself, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below and try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.